Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something a bit unusual. Why the ancient Egyptians had such a profound reverence for animals, particularly cats. Imagine walking through the bustling streets of ancient Thebes or Cairo, where the sun casts a golden haze over everything. Amidst the scent of incense and the rhythmic sound of the Nile lapping at the shore, you spot a sleek cat lounging by the doorway of a grand temple, eyeing you with that signature mysterious stare. That cat isn't just a house pet, it's a living, breathing embodiment of something divine. Now, before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and feel free to share where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. I always love knowing how far and wide our little history trips are going. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In ancient Egypt, cats weren't just pets, they were divine beings. They were the earthly manifestations of the goddess Bastet, one of the most important deities in the Egyptian pantheon. Bastet was the goddess of home, fertility, and childbirth, but she was also a fierce protector, particularly against evil spirits and dangers lurking in the dark corners of the home. Cats, with their sleek fur, sharp eyes, and ability to slip between the shadows, seemed like the perfect earthly counterpart to this deity. It's easy to imagine why Egyptians viewed them as guardians, not only of physical spaces, but of the spiritual realm as well. But here's the catch. You probably won't survive this if you think the ancient Egyptians saw cats as just cute little creatures who like to nap in the sun. No, they believed that the very essence of these animals held protective powers beyond your average pet-owner relationship. Cats were revered, even worshipped, and their mysterious, independent nature became a symbol of the divine. Historians still argue whether cats were first domesticated for their usefulness in controlling vermin, or whether they were considered sacred from the get-go. Some evidence suggests that the Egyptians saw cats as more than just pest control, offering them an almost supernatural status from the beginning. But what's undeniable is that over time, cats became firmly linked to Bastet, to the point where they were depicted in temple murals and statues, often lounging with a calm, regal air. It's as if they knew how important they were. The image of the cat as a divine figure became so ingrained in Egyptian society that harming one, intentionally or accidentally, was a serious crime, punishable by death in some cases. It's fascinating to think about the deep connection Egyptians had to the natural world. Cats, as divine protectors, were part of a broader reverence for animals that extended well beyond the feline family. Historians are still piecing together the extent of this relationship, but one thing is clear. In Egypt, animals were far more than just creatures living alongside humans. They were part of the divine order, symbols of the gods, and often the vessels through which divine protection flowed. In fact, this reverence went so deep that cats were mummified and buried with their owners. Cats didn't just guard the homes of the living, they were thought to continue this guardianship in the afterlife. Imagine walking through the necropolis and seeing rows upon rows of perfectly preserved cat mummies, their eyes closed in peaceful slumber. These mummies weren't just offerings or relics. They were considered sacred companions on the journey to the afterlife, ensuring that their protective powers continued to shield their owners, even in death. Historians still debate whether the mummification of animals, like cats, was purely an act of reverence, or if there were deeper spiritual meanings tied to the preservation of these animals. Some suggest that cats, being guardians of the home, were thought to guide their owners' souls through the treacherous realms of the afterlife, providing protection from dark forces that might otherwise claim them. In that sense, these cats weren't just pets or symbols. They were integral to the belief system that connected the living to the gods, the spiritual, and the afterlife. But there's more to this story. As we move deeper into the world of ancient Egyptian animal worship, you'll see that cats weren't the only creatures that held such significance. Animals were a core part of Egyptian mythology, with many other creatures taking on divine roles as well. Stay tuned as we explore how the other animals of Egypt, from crocodiles to ibises, fit into this fascinating tapestry of gods and myth. As you settle into the night, imagine walking through the stone-lined pathways of an ancient Egyptian temple, where the air is thick with the scent of burning myrrh and frankincense. In the distance, you hear the soft, steady murmur of water flowing from the Nile, a constant reminder of the life-giving river that ran through the heart of Egyptian culture. You might not notice it at first, but nestled quietly by the altar, you see a cat watching over the proceedings with a calm, unwavering gaze. This isn't just any cat. This one is thought to be a guardian spirit, one that holds the power to protect the temple from any malevolent forces. Cats were believed to not only protect physical spaces, like homes and temples, but also the very souls of the departed. In the Egyptian belief system, death was not the end. The afterlife was just as important as life on earth, and the journey to the afterlife was fraught with dangers. The soul needed protection, not only from evil spirits, but also from the chaotic forces that threatened to undo the order of the universe. This is where cats came in. With their quiet grace and ability to slip between the material and spiritual worlds, they were seen as ideal guardians of the afterlife. It's fascinating how deeply ingrained this belief in protection was. Cats were not only believed to shield their owners from mischief during their lives, but also to accompany them into the afterlife. This idea led to some extraordinary practices, including the mummification of cats. When an Egyptian cat died, it wasn't just a loss of a beloved pet, it was the loss of a spiritual protector. And so, the cat's body was carefully embalmed and wrapped in linen, much like its human counterpart. This mummification ensured that the cat could continue its work, guarding its owner's soul as it navigated the perilous realms of the afterlife. Historians still argue whether this was done primarily as an act of religious devotion or out of practical necessity. Were the Egyptians genuinely convinced that these mummified cats would continue to protect their owners? Or was the act of mummification a way of showing the gods how much they valued their guardianship? Either way, the importance of cats in the afterlife was clear. They were buried in tombs, sometimes alongside their owners, to continue their watchful role. The protective role of cats also extended to the homes of the living. Cats were believed to ward off evil spirits that might try to enter the home. The Egyptians were deeply concerned with the forces of chaos and disorder, known as Isfat, and they took every measure to protect themselves from it. It wasn't just physical dangers they feared, but spiritual ones as well. The cat, as a manifestation of Bastet's protective energy, was the perfect defense against these unseen forces. Interestingly, this belief extended to the way cats were treated in daily life. Cats were given special privileges, often living in the houses of the wealthier classes, where they were pampered and kept close to family members. They were given the best food, often a combination of fish and bread, and were revered not just for their beauty, but for their spiritual significance. Cats roamed freely in these homes, their presence seen as a constant source of protection and good fortune. Historians still debate the exact reasons behind the reverence for cats. Some suggest that their ability to hunt vermin, particularly rats and mice, made them indispensable in the agricultural society of Egypt. Others argue that the Egyptians were drawn to their mysterious nature, as cats often seemed to move with a divine grace, silently watching the world around them. Regardless of the origins of their reverence, it's clear that cats were seen as much more than simple animals. They were revered as guardians, protectors, and divine creatures. But it wasn't just cats that played such a crucial role in Egyptian religion. Cats were part of a larger tradition of animal worship that permeated Egyptian culture. In the coming sections, we'll explore the many other animals that were seen as sacred in ancient Egypt and why they were so deeply connected to the gods. By now, you're beginning to understand just how deeply the Egyptians intertwined their lives with the animals around them. But the worship of cats wasn't the only strange and fascinating form of animal reverence practiced in ancient Egypt. As you wander through the grand temples, you might notice other animals, each more impressive and divine than the last. Imagine stepping into a massive, cool stone chamber. The walls are adorned with intricate carvings depicting humans and gods, animals and mythical creatures. In one corner, you spot what appears to be a large, ornate shrine where hundreds of mummified cats rest in perfect stillness, as if waiting for their next spiritual task. Egyptians didn't just mummify cats. Other sacred animals, too, were given the same treatment. The practice of mummification was a way to preserve the sanctity of these animals and ensure that their spiritual guardianship could continue even after death. Cats, as divine protectors, were typically buried with their owners, but there were also cases where they were mummified on their own, often placed in specially constructed tombs or even in small shrines dedicated to the animal. One of the most famous examples of animal mummification is the discovery of the sacred cat cemetery at Bubastis, the center of Bastet worship. There, archaeologists unearthed thousands of mummified cats, some of which were likely offerings to the goddess herself. These cats were interred with incredible care, and many were buried with objects that indicated their importance: small statues, jewelry, and other items meant to honor the god they represented. It's believed that the sheer number of these mummies indicates just how highly cats were regarded, both as protectors and as intermediaries between the human world and the divine. Historians still debate why Egyptians went to such lengths to preserve these animals. Some suggest it was a form of tribute to the gods, an act that would ensure divine favor. Others argue that mummification was a ritual designed to ensure the animal's continued role as a spiritual guide, just as the mummification of humans was meant to preserve their souls for the afterlife. Either way, the significance of animal mummification in ancient Egypt speaks volumes about the deep reverence Egyptians had for the creatures that lived alongside them. But it wasn't just cats that received this kind of treatment. Other animals, like crocodiles, ibises, and even bulls, were mummified in large numbers. Let's take the crocodile, for instance. Now, if you're imagining the fierce predator lurking in the Nile, you're not wrong. But the Egyptians didn't see crocodiles as mere threats to be feared. They saw them as powerful and sacred creatures. Sobek, the crocodile god, was revered as a deity who embodied both the destructive and life-giving forces of nature. He was associated with the Nile's floods, which brought fertility to the land, but also with the dangers of the river. As a protector of Egypt's borders, Sobek was both feared and worshipped. Sobek's devotees would often offer up crocodiles to honor him, sometimes even keeping live crocodiles in sacred pools within temples. These reptiles were considered sacred animals, and their mummification was meant to preserve their power for the afterlife. Some temples even had special areas for the care and feeding of these revered animals. In a way, the crocodile was seen as a physical embodiment of Sobek's power, protecting the people and ensuring that they remained safe from the dangers of the Nile. In fact, Sobek was so important that his followers believed the god could change the course of rivers, influence the fertility of the land, and even bring victory in battle. Historians still debate whether the Egyptians truly believed that their crocodile offerings would appease Sobek, or if these animals were viewed more as symbolic representations of the god's power. Some scholars believe that the act of mummifying these creatures was meant to ensure Sobek's favor in a much more literal sense, by offering him a physical body that could continue to protect them even after death. This idea of sacred animals being mummified and placed in temples as physical manifestations of divine power wasn't exclusive to crocodiles. Bulls, ibisas, and even gazelles were similarly mummified and offered up to the gods, each animal connected to a different deity. The Apis bull, for example, was considered the earthly manifestation of Ptah, the creator god, and its mummification was a major religious event. When the Apis bull died, a new bull would be chosen to take its place, and this process of selection and mummification was a key part of Egyptian religious life. Historians are still unsure of whether the mummification of these animals was seen as an offering to the gods, or as a way to preserve the animal's spiritual power for future generations. Some scholars argue that the mummified animals were meant to serve as eternal guardians of the temples and their followers, while others suggest that they were seen as conduits through which the gods could interact with the human world. Regardless of the exact purpose, the sheer number of mummified animals found throughout Egypt underscores the importance of these creatures in Egyptian religious practice. As you reflect on this, it becomes clear that the Egyptians had a unique and deep understanding of the role animals played in the spiritual and daily life of their society. The reverence they showed toward animals was not just a matter of superstition. It was a core belief that intertwined their religious practices, daily routines, and the very essence of their connection to the gods. You're starting to see just how central animals were to the ancient Egyptian worldview, right? It's like walking through a vast, living mosaic, each animal a piece of the divine puzzle, from the sleek and graceful cat to the powerful and unpredictable crocodile. Each creature was seen as more than just part of the natural world. They were sacred, divine, and directly connected to the gods. But as you wander deeper into this world of animal reverence, it becomes clear that Egypt's sacred animals weren't limited to just cats and crocodiles. As you walk down the banks of the Nile, imagine the sight of an ibis soaring across the sky, its wings outstretched in perfect symmetry. It's a majestic bird, and for the Egyptians, its graceful flight held more meaning than just the beauty of nature. It was the flight of the god Thoth himself. Thoth, the god of wisdom, writing, and the moon, was often depicted with the head of an ibis, and the bird became his earthly representative. To the Egyptians, the ibis wasn't just a bird. It was a symbol of divine intellect and cosmic order. It's hard not to see the symbolism here. The ibis, with its steady and deliberate flight, was thought to represent the order and precision of the universe. In a culture that deeply revered balance and harmony, what the Egyptians called Maat, the ibis was the perfect symbol of the divine forces that maintained that order. Thoth, as the god of writing and wisdom, was believed to have recorded the fate of every person, and the ibis was thought to carry that knowledge between the worlds of the living and the gods. The bird's ability to glide effortlessly through the air was seen as a divine act of guidance, leading the way for those who sought wisdom. Historians still argue about the exact relationship between the ibis and Thoth. Some scholars believe that the association was based purely on the bird's behavior, its regular flight patterns, mirroring the predictable rhythms of the universe. Others argue that the ibis's connection to Thoth was more symbolic, representing the god's wisdom and the idea of cosmic balance. Either way, the fact that this bird was held in such high regard speaks to the larger Egyptian belief that the natural world was imbued with divine significance. Animals like the ibis weren't just seen as creatures. They were manifestations of the gods themselves. And it wasn't just the ibis. The Nile itself was teeming with creatures that the Egyptians believed were manifestations of the god's power. Hippos, crocodiles, and even the humble frog had roles to play in this divine ecosystem. For instance, the hippopotamus, often depicted as a fearsome predator, was associated with the goddess Taweret, the protector of women and children. Taweret was depicted as a hybrid creature, part woman, part hippopotamus, and part lion, symbolizing both the nurturing and fierce aspects of motherhood. Her image was often carved into amulets and placed in homes to protect mothers and children, ensuring their safety from harm. This mix of nurturing and fierce power wasn't limited to Taweret. The Egyptian gods were often portrayed with animal characteristics, merging human and divine forms to represent the complex nature of their power. For example, Hathor, the goddess of love and motherhood, was often shown as a cow or with cow's horns. The cow, a symbol of fertility and sustenance, was a natural fit for a goddess who represented these aspects of life. And yet, the sacredness of these animals didn't mean that the Egyptians always treated them with reverence. There were also ritual sacrifices made to appease the gods, especially during important religious festivals. During the annual flooding of the Nile, for example, Egyptians would offer sacrifices to the gods to ensure that the floodwaters would bring fertility to the land. These sacrifices weren't just symbolic. They were believed to be necessary acts that maintained the balance of the universe and ensured the continuation of life. Historians still debate how often animal sacrifices took place in ancient Egypt. Some suggest that these sacrifices were rare and occurred only during major religious festivals, while others argue that animal offerings were a regular part of Egyptian life. Regardless of the frequency, one thing is certain: the act of sacrificing animals was seen as a way of maintaining the divine balance between the gods and humans. The Egyptians believed that their actions, whether it was offering food to the gods, performing rituals, or even sacrificing animals, had a direct impact on their relationship with the divine. But it's not just about the animals themselves. The worship of these animals was closely tied to the overall concept of order and chaos in Egyptian religion. Ma'at, the goddess of truth and order, was central to Egyptian life. It was Ma'at that ensured the stability of the cosmos, the health of the pharaoh, and the prosperity of the land. Animals, as representations of the gods, played an essential role in maintaining that order. The presence of sacred animals in temples, tombs, and homes was a way of ensuring that the divine forces of order were constantly at work in the human world. As you reflect on this, it's easy to see how deeply the Egyptians believed in the interconnectedness of all things: humans, gods, animals, and the natural world. Their worship of animals wasn't just about the creatures themselves. It was about the divine forces they represented and the way those forces maintained the harmony of the universe. The animals were not merely symbols. They were active participants in the divine order that Egyptians so deeply cherished. As you journey through the temples of Egypt, your gaze falls upon the imposing figure of a crocodile statue, its jaws wide open in a silent roar. This is no ordinary reptile. It represents Sobek, the crocodile god, whose dual nature as both a creator and destroyer captured the Egyptians' complex understanding of the forces of nature. If you've ever imagined the ancient Nile as a place of both life and death, the crocodile perfectly symbolizes this balance. Sobek, with his massive jaws and powerful presence, was worshipped for his ability to both protect and threaten, to bring fertility through the floods of the Nile, and yet embody the dangers that lurked within the waters. Sobek wasn't just a god to be feared, he was a god to be honored. His strength and power were seen as essential to Egypt's survival, as the Nile was both a source of sustenance and a dangerous force to be reckoned with. The ancient Egyptians, with their deep understanding of the unpredictable nature of the Nile, saw Sobek as a necessary figure who could control the elements and ensure the land's fertility. During annual floods, they would offer sacrifices to Sobek, hoping to appease him and ensure that the waters would bring life to the fields. The crocodile, as Sobek's earthly representative, became a symbol of this vital connection between the gods and the natural world. Crocodiles were treated with the utmost respect. In some temples dedicated to Sobek, live crocodiles were kept in sacred pools, their movements watched closely by priests and worshippers alike. The presence of these reptiles in the temple was seen as a direct link to the god himself, and their care and feeding became a religious duty. Many crocodiles were mummified after death as a way of preserving their divine connection. In fact, some of the most impressive archaeological discoveries related to Sobek have come from the mummification sites of these sacred crocodiles, offering us a glimpse into the rituals that surrounded them. Historians still debate the role of live crocodiles in Sobek's worship. Some scholars believe these crocodiles were treated almost like sacred pets, while others argue that they were seen as physical manifestations of Sobek's power, his divine will made flesh. Regardless of the specifics, one thing is clear: Sobek and his crocodiles were an integral part of Egyptian religious life, representing the delicate balance between life and death, protection and destruction that the Egyptians saw as fundamental to the universe. But Sobek wasn't the only animal to wield such divine power. The role of animals in Egyptian mythology extends far beyond crocodiles, and other creatures, especially bulls and ibises, held significant religious roles as well. Let's shift our focus to the Apis bull, which was regarded as one of the most important animals in Egyptian religion. The Apis bull was believed to be the earthly manifestation of Ptah, the creator god. Ptah was the god of craftsmanship, creation, and the arts, and his bull, chosen from a herd of special bulls based on unique markings, was considered a sacred symbol of divine power. The Apis bull was revered not just as a living being, but as a literal representation of Ptah's creative force in the world. When an Apis bull died, it was mourned as the loss of a divine incarnation, and the mourning process could last for days, with elaborate rituals performed to honor the animal. The burial of the Apis bull was no small affair. In fact, the tomb of the Apis bull in Saqqara is one of the most impressive archaeological sites in Egypt. The bull would be buried in a grand tomb, often accompanied by numerous offerings and ritual objects to ensure its journey to the afterlife. This wasn't just an act of mourning, it was a recognition of the bull's sacred role in the cosmic order. The new Apis bull would then be chosen to replace the deceased one, continuing the cycle of divine representation. Historians still argue about the exact process of selecting the new Apis bull. Some suggest that it was a priestly decision made based on the animal's physical characteristics and behavior. Others believe the bull's selection was influenced by divine signs, such as celestial omens or natural phenomena. Whatever the process, the fact remains that the Apis bull was a central figure in Egyptian religious life, embodying the divine creativity and power of Ptah. But there's more to this story than just the reverence of animals like Sobek and Ptah's bull. The Egyptians had a broader understanding of animal symbolism, extending to a wide range of creatures associated with the gods. The ibis, which we touched on earlier, was one of the most iconic sacred animals, but it wasn't the only bird revered in Egyptian culture. Geese, for example, held a special place in the hearts of the Egyptians. Geese were associated with the goddess Nekhbet, who was the protector of Upper Egypt. Nekhbet was often depicted as a vulture or a goose, and her image was frequently used as a symbol of royal authority and divine protection. It was believed that her call could warn of danger, and her vigilance was seen as a divine safeguard for the pharaoh and the kingdom. Geese, in their wild, migratory nature, symbolize both the protective forces of the gods and the natural order of the seasons. Their presence was a reminder of the divine oversight that ensured the well-being of Egypt. Historians are still unsure about how much the Egyptians valued geese beyond their symbolic meaning. Some believe that the reverence for geese was tied to their migratory patterns, which reflected the cyclical nature of life and death. Others argue that the goose was simply a practical animal, valued for its eggs and meat, that came to be associated with the divine through its connections to Nekhbet. Regardless of the reasoning, the reverence for geese, like the other sacred animals of Egypt, underscores the importance of animals in maintaining the cosmic order and the Egyptian connection to the divine. As you wander through the world of ancient Egypt, you can see how the worship of animals was tied to a deep understanding of the natural world and its mysteries. Animals were more than just creatures to be admired. They were divine messengers, protectors, and representations of the gods themselves. Each animal played a specific role in maintaining the balance of the universe, and their worship was a way of ensuring that harmony and order would prevail. As you move deeper into the temples and shrines of ancient Egypt, you may notice a recurring theme in the way animals were revered. It wasn't just the cats, crocodiles, or bulls that commanded respect. It was the very concept of animals as messengers of the gods, as symbols of divine forces. To the Egyptians, every creature had a purpose, a role in maintaining Maat, the cosmic balance that kept the world in harmony. And this idea didn't just apply to the larger, more powerful animals. Even the smallest creatures carried divine significance. Take the humble serpent, for example. Serpents, particularly the cobra, were another group of animals closely associated with Egyptian religion. The most famous of these is the goddess Wadjet, often depicted as a cobra or as a woman with the head of a serpent. Wadjet was the protector of Lower Egypt, and her image was often seen on the crown of pharaohs, symbolizing their divine right to rule. In fact, the uraeus, the cobra image on the pharaoh's crown, was a symbol of royal authority and protection, representing the goddess's power to protect the ruler from enemies, both mortal and divine. The association between serpents and royal power is fascinating, especially when you consider how the Egyptians viewed snakes in general. Snakes were seen as symbols of both danger and protection. The cobra, with its menacing hood and swift strike, was a creature to be feared. Yet, in Wadjet's form, it became a symbol of divine guardianship, protecting Egypt's leaders and ensuring the stability of the land. The cobra was both a force of destruction and a symbol of protection, another example of the Egyptians' belief in the dual nature of the divine. Historians still debate the significance of the serpent in Egyptian religion. Some scholars argue that the snake's connection to Wadjet and the pharaoh's crown was purely symbolic, representing the power of kingship. Others believe that the snake held deeper mystical significance, representing the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, an idea that is also deeply ingrained in Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife. Regardless of the exact meaning, the role of serpents in Egyptian religion is a perfect example of how the Egyptians understood the natural world as being filled with divine forces, each creature playing its part in the grand cosmic drama. But the serpent wasn't the only creature that held such symbolic power. The ancient Egyptians also revered birds, particularly the vulture, which was associated with the goddess Nekhbet, the protector of Upper Egypt. Nekhbet, often depicted as a vulture or a woman with the head of a vulture, was seen as a protector of the pharaoh and the nation. The vulture, with its keen eyesight and ability to soar high above the earth, symbolized the watchful eye of the divine, ever vigilant and ready to protect those under its care. The reverence for the vulture was so strong that images of the goddess were often placed in tombs and temples to ensure divine protection for the deceased. As the vulture was thought to possess the ability to see both the immediate world and the spiritual realm, it was believed to be able to guide the souls of the departed, ensuring their safe passage into the afterlife. The symbolism of the vulture, with its ability to see beyond the earthly realm, underscores the Egyptians' belief in the interconnectedness of life, death, and the divine. Historians are still unsure of the full extent of Nekhbet's role in Egyptian religion. Some scholars suggest that she was primarily a goddess of protection linked to the pharaoh's authority. Others argue that she had a broader role in guiding souls to the afterlife, acting as a spiritual guide for the deceased. Regardless of her exact role, Nekhbet's vulture form remains one of the most powerful symbols of divine protection in Egyptian art and culture. The connection between animals and the afterlife is something we see time and again in Egyptian religion. Cats, crocodiles, bulls, snakes, vultures. Each of these creatures played a role in ensuring the safe passage of the soul to the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians believed that the natural world was not separate from the divine realm. Instead, it was a reflection of the gods themselves. Every animal, no matter how common or exotic, had a divine essence that connected it to the gods and to the afterlife. This connection between animals and the afterlife wasn't just symbolic, it was practical. The Egyptians believed that the presence of sacred animals, like cats and crocodiles, could protect the deceased from harm in the afterlife. Mummified animals were placed in tombs, not only as offerings to the gods, but as guardians for the soul of the departed. These animals were seen as intermediaries between the living and the divine, ensuring that the soul would be guided safely through the underworld and into eternity. Historians still debate the exact beliefs surrounding the mummification of animals in the afterlife. Some argue that it was primarily an offering to the gods, while others suggest that the animals were seen as literal guardians of the deceased. Either way, it's clear that the Egyptians' relationship with animals was deeply spiritual and intertwined with their views on death and the afterlife. The practice of animal worship in Egypt was not just about reverence for the natural world. It was about ensuring that the forces of the divine would be present to protect and guide the living and the dead alike. As you continue your journey through the ancient Egyptian world, it becomes clear that the line between the natural and the divine was blurred. In Egypt, animals were not just part of the world, they were part of the divine order itself. The sacredness of animals in ancient Egypt was not just confined to those with obvious divine connections, cats, crocodiles, or bulls, but extended to creatures that might seem less likely to earn a divine reputation, like birds, snakes, and even insects. The role of animals in Egyptian religion wasn't merely symbolic. It was woven into every part of their culture, from everyday life to elaborate religious rituals. Take the humble scarab beetle, for instance. Though small, its significance was enormous in Egyptian thought. The scarab beetle, known as the dung beetle to modern scientists, was viewed by the Egyptians as a symbol of regeneration and transformation. The beetle's behavior of rolling dung into balls and burying them was interpreted as a metaphor for the sun's daily journey across the sky, its cycle of death and rebirth. This connection to the cycle of life was so powerful that the scarab became one of the most widely used symbols in ancient Egypt. It was associated with the god Khepri, the god of creation and the rising sun, who was often depicted with the head of a scarab. But the scarab's significance didn't end there. Scarabs were used in everyday life as amulets, particularly in funerary contexts. They were placed in tombs and buried with the deceased to ensure safe passage into the afterlife. These amulets, known as heart scarabs, were inscribed with spells from the Book of the Dead, a funerary text that guided souls through the dangers of the underworld. The heart scarab, placed near the heart of the deceased, acted as a protector, ensuring that the soul would be judged favorably by the gods. The scarab's association with regeneration and its connection to the sun's daily resurrection made it a potent symbol of eternal life. Historians still debate the origin of the scarab's religious symbolism. Some suggest that the scarab's association with the sun was a later development, while others argue that it was tied to the ancient Egyptian understanding of cosmic cycles from the very beginning. Regardless of its origins, the scarab's role in Egyptian religious life is undeniable. It was a creature that symbolized not just physical rebirth, but spiritual renewal, a theme that was central to Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife. While the scarab beetle embodied regeneration, other animals were revered for their power to protect or guide. The falcon, for instance, was another bird that held profound religious significance. The falcon was the earthly manifestation of Horus, one of Egypt's most important gods, the god of kingship, protection, and the sky. Horus was typically depicted as a man with the head of a falcon, symbolizing his dominion over both the earth and the heavens. As the god of kingship, Horus was intimately linked to the pharaoh, who was considered his earthly incarnation. The falcon, therefore, wasn't just a bird. It was a symbol of the pharaoh's divine right to rule, as well as a protector of Egypt. Horus's connection to falcons extended beyond his iconography. In many temples, falcon-shaped statues and amulets were used to invoke his protection. The falcon was also associated with the concept of Mat, the divine order that ensured the stability of the cosmos. As a god of protection, Horus was believed to watch over the land and the people, keeping chaos at bay. The falcon, with its sharp vision and ability to soar high above the earth, was seen as a symbol of clarity and vigilance. It's no wonder that the Egyptians saw the falcon as a divine guide, soaring between the realms of the gods and the mortal world. Historians are still unsure of the full extent of Horus's role in Egyptian religion. Some argue that his connection to the falcon was primarily symbolic, representing the god's power and authority. Others suggest that Horus's connection to the falcon was more mystical, with the bird's flight patterns serving as a metaphor for the god's ability to traverse the heavens. Regardless of the specifics, the falcon's role in Egyptian religion is a testament to the deep connection the Egyptians had with the animals that populated their world. Of course, not all sacred animals were as grand or powerful as the falcon or the crocodile. Even creatures as small as frogs and locusts held important roles in Egyptian religion. Frogs, for example, were associated with Heket, the goddess of fertility and childbirth, who was depicted with the head of a frog. Frogs were believed to bring fertility to the land, as their appearance in large numbers often signaled the arrival of the Nile's annual flood. This flood was vital to Egyptian agriculture, bringing nutrients to the soil and ensuring the fertility of the land. Heket, as the goddess who oversaw childbirth and renewal, was closely tied to the fertility of both humans and the land. In a similar vein, locusts, though not typically revered for their beauty, were viewed as symbols of transformation and renewal in certain contexts. During times of plague or hardship, locusts were believed to be agents of divine will, sent to test the strength and resolve of the people. In other cases, locusts were seen as messengers of the gods, bringing about necessary change in the natural order. The Egyptians' view of locusts, while more ambiguous than their reverence for other animals, still reflects their belief in the divine power of nature to shape human destiny. Historians still argue about the precise significance of these smaller creatures in Egyptian religion. Some believe that their roles were more symbolic, representing the forces of nature that shaped the world. Others argue that these animals played a more direct role in the Egyptians' understanding of the god's will, serving as messengers or agents of divine intervention. Whatever the case, it's clear that the Egyptians saw every creature as a reflection of the divine order, a symbol of the god's power and influence over the world. In the broader context of Egyptian religious life, animals were seen not just as beings that existed in the natural world, but as manifestations of the divine, imbued with spiritual significance that connected the human world to the gods. Whether large or small, powerful or seemingly insignificant, every animal had a role to play in the cosmic balance of Maat. Through their worship of these animals, the Egyptians demonstrated their deep understanding of the interconnectedness of all life and the divine forces that governed it. As you continue to walk through the vibrant, mystic world of ancient Egypt, you realize that this reverence for animals wasn't just about the gods or the afterlife. The Egyptians' relationship with animals was deeply practical as well, integrated into their daily lives, from the food they ate to the protection they sought. But despite the natural practicality of having animals around, Egyptians viewed every interaction with the animal world as deeply intertwined with divine meaning. Their devotion to these creatures wasn't just about nurturing or controlling them. It was about ensuring that the forces of nature, both good and bad, stayed in harmony. Take, for example, the role of bulls in Egyptian society. While the Apis bull, representing Ptah, was one of the most prominent divine creatures, bulls were also deeply embedded in the culture's agriculture and daily rituals. The bull wasn't just a beast of burden, it was a symbol of strength, power, and fertility, essential to the agricultural cycles that made Egypt thrive. They pulled plows, provided milk, and when they died, were sometimes even mummified for the afterlife, honoring their connection to the gods. But what's fascinating is that bulls were also a central part of ceremonial life. When an Apis bull died, it didn't just pass away quietly in a barn. It was treated like royalty. The funeral for an Apis bull was a grand event. The animal was embalmed, and offerings were made to honor it, much like the ceremonies that would be performed for an important pharaoh. The bull was then interred in a tomb, often with rich artifacts and ceremonial items, to mark its importance in maintaining Egypt's connection to the divine order. The entire process, from the bull's death to its burial, was treated as a sacred act, as though this animal had been a direct conduit for the gods on earth. The fact that the Egyptians treated such an animal with the utmost reverence speaks to the deep respect they held for the natural world and the creatures within it. Historians still debate the full significance of the Apis bull and its death rituals. Some scholars argue that these elaborate ceremonies were a reflection of the bull's unique position in Egyptian society, representing the physical embodiment of Ptah's creative force. Others suggest that the rituals surrounding the Apis bull's death were meant to demonstrate the human desire to maintain balance in both the natural and divine worlds. Regardless of the interpretation, the burial of the Apis bull is a powerful example of how animals were treated as both earthly and spiritual beings, participating in the cosmic cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Beyond the royal bulls, Egyptians also revered the animals that helped them maintain balance in their homes and farmlands. Cats were, of course, the most famous example of this protective bond. They were not only worshipped as divine entities, but also lived side by side with the Egyptians in their homes, where they protected grain stores and livestock from pests. The Egyptian reverence for cats is so well known today that it can almost feel cliché. Cats lounging lazily by windows, strolling with indifference as if they're royalty. But in ancient Egypt, this wasn't just a form of domestic convenience. It was a deeply spiritual arrangement. Cats were seen as protectors, not just from rats and mice, but from the spiritual dangers that lurked in the shadows. In a way, cats embodied the perfect blend of practicality and spirituality. Their hunting prowess was essential for keeping homes and grain stores safe from vermin. And yet, their quiet, mysterious behavior, their ability to move between the visible and invisible worlds, lent them an almost supernatural quality. The Egyptians didn't just tolerate their cats, they respected them, ensuring their well-being and honoring them as divine protectors. This dual role, practical protectors and divine agents, extended to many other animals as well. The jackal, for example, was associated with Anubis, the god of mummification and the afterlife. Anubis was depicted with the head of a jackal, a creature that was often seen near tombs and cemeteries, scavenging the dead. But while the jackal's association with death might seem morbid at first, it was actually seen as a symbol of the cycle of life and death. The jackal, like Anubis, was a guide, leading souls safely to the afterlife and ensuring that they were protected during their journey. Similarly, the vulture, associated with Nekhbet, was revered not just for its association with protection, but also for its role in the natural order. Vultures were scavengers, feeding on what had died. They helped to keep the land clean and balanced. This, too, was symbolic of the divine role of maintaining Mat, the balance of life and death. The vulture, though seen as a creature of death, was, paradoxically, one of the most important protectors of life in Egyptian mythology. It shows just how deeply the Egyptians understood the interconnectedness of life, death, and nature. Historians are still fascinated by the Egyptians' ability to view death and life not as opposites, but as complementary forces. The reverence for animals, like the jackal and vulture, reflects an understanding of death as a natural part of the cycle of existence, not something to be feared or avoided. In Egyptian thought, animals played an essential role in maintaining the spiritual equilibrium of the world. They were living embodiments of the gods, ensuring that the divine will was carried out in both life and death. This belief system extended beyond the realms of myth and into everyday life. Animals, especially those with divine associations, were seen as guides, protectors, and mediators between humans and the gods. Whether it was a cat in the house, a crocodile in a temple, or a jackal at a tomb, the animals of ancient Egypt were never seen as mere creatures. They were integral to the very structure of the universe, ensuring that balance was maintained. By now, it's clear that the worship of animals in ancient Egypt was not just limited to a few beloved creatures like cats or crocodiles. The entire natural world, every animal, no matter how large or small, was seen as a divine force that connected the human realm to the gods. This belief in the sacredness of animals was so central to Egyptian life that it permeated all aspects of their culture, from their religious rituals to their everyday practices. Animals were not just symbols of the divine, they were living, breathing manifestations of gods, and their actions were deeply intertwined with the fate of the human world. One of the most striking examples of this integration of animals into the divine order is seen in the Egyptian concept of the animal cults. These were religious practices that centered around the worship of specific animals, often in association with a particular god or goddess. Temples dedicated to animals were scattered throughout Egypt, and they played a significant role in the religious life of the people. For example, the sacred bull of Memphis, the Apis bull, was housed in a temple where it was worshipped by thousands of Egyptians. The Temple of Karnak, which was dedicated to the god Amun, also had a sacred crocodile pool where crocodiles were kept in honor of Sobek, the crocodile god. These animal cults were not just about offering sacrifices to the gods. They were about creating a physical space where the divine and the earthly realms could overlap. The animals in these temples were seen as living representatives of the gods themselves, and their care and treatment were of utmost importance. The priests and priestesses who worked in these temples were responsible for the daily rituals and sacrifices, which included feeding the sacred animals, performing prayers, and ensuring that the animals were properly cared for. In some cases, these animals were even embalmed and mummified to ensure that their divine essence remained intact for eternity. Historians still debate the true nature of these animal cults. Some believe that they were a form of religious devotion meant to honor the gods through the care and worship of their earthly representatives. Others argue that these cults were more about maintaining the natural balance of the world, ensuring that the forces of chaos and order were kept in check. Either way, the existence of these cults speaks to the central role that animals played in the spiritual life of ancient Egypt. They were not just passive symbols, but active participants in the maintenance of Ma'at, the divine order of the universe. It wasn't just the major deities like Bastet, Sobek, or Horus who had their sacred animals. Lesser gods and goddesses also had their own animal associations. For instance, the goddess Hathor, who was the goddess of love, fertility, and music, was often depicted with the head of a cow or as a cow herself. Hathor's role in Egyptian society was complex, encompassing everything from motherhood and joy to the protection of the dead. The cow, with its association to motherhood and nourishment, was the perfect symbol for a goddess who represented the life-giving forces of the world. Hathor's temples, like the one at Dendera, were often filled with imagery of cows, and her followers would offer milk and other dairy products as part of their rituals. The cow was more than just a physical symbol of Hathor. It was also a symbol of the nurturing, protective aspects of the divine. The reverence for the cow, much like the reverence for other animals, was tied to the Egyptians' deep belief in the interconnectedness of all life. Just as cows nurtured life on earth, the goddess Hathor was believed to nurture the soul in the afterlife. This belief was so strong that Hathor's role in the afterlife was as important as her role in the earthly realm. She was considered a goddess who guided the deceased through the trials of the underworld, ensuring their safe passage to eternity. Historians still argue about the extent of Hathor's influence in Egyptian religion. Some scholars suggest that her worship was primarily tied to agricultural and familial life, while others point to her more mystical role as a guide in the afterlife. Regardless of her specific role, it's clear that Hathor, like so many other Egyptian gods and goddesses, was intricately linked to the animals that embodied her divine attributes. As you reflect on all of this, it's striking how the worship of animals was so much more than an abstract belief system. Animals were seen as essential parts of the natural and spiritual world, and their roles were deeply woven into the fabric of Egyptian culture. The reverence for animals wasn't just about showing respect for nature. It was about ensuring that the cosmic order was maintained and that the divine forces of protection, wisdom, and fertility remained active in the world. In many ways, this belief in the sacredness of animals was a reflection of the Egyptians' understanding of their place in the universe. They didn't see themselves as separate from the natural world, but as integral parts of it, deeply connected to the animals around them. The animals were seen as companions, guides, and protectors, living, breathing conduits between the earthly and the divine realms. The Egyptians' devotion to these animals was not just a religious practice, but a way of understanding the world around them, of ensuring that life, death, and the afterlife were all part of a continuous balance cycle. Historians still debate the extent to which animals were worshipped in ancient Egypt. Some suggest that their reverence was purely symbolic, while others argue that it was an integral part of the Egyptians' worldview. What's clear, however, is that animals were central to the way the Egyptians understood the divine order, and their worship of these creatures was a vital part of their religious life. As we approach the final stretch of this journey through ancient Egypt, there's one last element of animal worship that's crucial to understanding the depth of their belief system: the intricate rituals and sacrifices that were a core part of these animal cults. The reverence for animals wasn't just about the symbolic meaning attached to each creature. It was also about engaging in physical acts that helped align the human world with the divine. These rituals were designed to ensure that the gods remained pleased and that the forces of nature stayed in harmony. In this section, we'll delve into the fascinating world of these sacred practices, exploring how the Egyptians interacted with the animals they worshipped, and what those interactions meant both for them and for the gods they believed controlled their fates. The Egyptians didn't just revere their sacred animals from afar. They actively engaged with them in a variety of ways. In the grand temples of Egypt, you'd find priests and priestesses offering food, incense, and even songs to the animals, recognizing them as living embodiments of the gods. These animals were treated with the utmost respect, with each temple carefully managing the care of its sacred creatures. For instance, the sacred crocodiles of Sobek were housed in specially constructed pools, where they were fed and tended to by priests who ensured they were treated like royalty. Similarly, the Apis bulls were fed a special diet and were given a life of luxury until their death. These animals weren't seen as mere pets or beasts of burden. They were divine agents, and their care was a sacred duty. Historians are still unsure about the exact details of these rituals. Some suggest that the priests viewed the animals as literal vessels for the gods, while others believe that the rituals were more symbolic, reinforcing the connection between the gods and the natural world. Regardless of the specifics, it's clear that these sacred animals were integrated into daily religious life, offering food, incense, and even personal prayers to them was seen as a way of ensuring the gods' favor, and it was considered an essential part of maintaining the balance of Maat, the divine order of the universe. The rituals didn't stop at offerings. In some cases, the Egyptians would hold grand processions where the sacred animals would be paraded through the streets of cities, accompanied by music, chanting, and the waving of banners. These processions weren't just celebrations of the gods. They were public declarations of the divine presence in the city. By bringing the animals out into the open, the Egyptians believed they were inviting the gods to bless the people with protection, prosperity, and fertility. The animals' movements were seen as direct expressions of the divine will, and their appearances were taken in as signs of the god's favor or displeasure. Perhaps the most dramatic examples of these rituals were the sacrifices made in the name of the gods. These were not casual acts. They were performed with the utmost care and reverence, as the Egyptians believed that their offerings would directly influence the course of events. Animal sacrifices were often offered during major religious festivals, such as the annual flooding of the Nile or the coronation of a new pharaoh. These sacrifices, which could include the slaughter of bulls, goats, and other animals, were performed by priests who had been specially trained to carry out the ritual correctly. The idea behind the sacrifice was not one of violence or cruelty, but rather an offering to the gods to maintain the harmony of the universe. By giving up an animal, the Egyptians believed they were giving something valuable to the gods in exchange for their blessings. Historians still debate the role of animal sacrifice in Egyptian religion. Some argue that sacrifices were central to maintaining the balance between the human and divine realms, while others suggest that they were more about appeasing the gods during times of crisis. Regardless, the fact remains that the practice of animal sacrifice was a key part of the religious life in ancient Egypt, reinforcing the idea that the divine world was deeply entwined with the natural world, and that human actions had a direct impact on the forces of nature. But even with the sacrificial rituals, the Egyptians' relationship with animals was far from one of exploitation. Instead, it was based on mutual respect. The reverence for animals was not just about their symbolic value. It was about the role they played in the larger cosmic cycle. These animals, in their connection to the gods, were seen as active participants in the maintenance of Ma'at. The Egyptians believed that their actions, whether in the form of sacrifices, offerings, or simple acts of care, could influence the gods' decisions and ensure that the balance of the universe remained intact. The belief in the sacredness of animals was so deeply ingrained in Egyptian society that it extended beyond religious rituals and into everyday life. For the Egyptians, the divine wasn't something distant or abstract. It was present in the natural world, in the animals they encountered every day. The worship of animals wasn't just about appeasing the gods. It was about recognizing the divine in everything around them, understanding that the natural world and the divine world were not separate, but deeply connected. As you reflect on this, it's clear that the Egyptians' worship of animals was a central part of their worldview. Animals weren't just creatures to be admired or feared. They were living, breathing representations of the gods. They were guides, protectors, and messengers helping the Egyptians navigate the complexities of life, death, and the afterlife. The reverence for animals was a reflection of the Egyptians' understanding of the interconnectedness of all things, the belief that everything in the world, from the smallest insect to the greatest deity, had a purpose in maintaining the balance of the universe. And so, as we bring this journey through ancient Egypt to a close, we can see that the worship of animals was more than just a religious practice. It was a way of life. From the regal cats that guarded homes to the mighty crocodiles that ensured the fertility of the Nile, the animals of Egypt were not just part of the world, they were part of the divine. Their worship was a way of honoring the gods and ensuring that the balance of the universe remained intact. It was a profound and lasting reminder that in the eyes of the Egyptians, the world was filled with divine energy, alive in every animal, every person, and every aspect of the natural world.